Welcome to Biz Help for You with host Candy Messer. Entrepreneurs like to focus on the big picture, like profitability, success, and a smooth-running organization. But there always seems to be those little things like taxes, employee compensation, laws, regulations, and more. Now you can get the answers you need in one place. Join us today as we break it all down for you. Now, here's your host, Candy Messer.
Hello and welcome to Biz Help for You with Candy Messer. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed my last interview, and if you missed the episode and would like to listen in, a link can be found on my YouTube and Facebook pages, as well as multiple favorite podcast platforms. And if you'd like to receive notifications on when my podcasts have been uploaded, please like and subscribe. Now let's learn a little bit about my guest today. John Hinson is the editorial director for Spotlight Branding, a content marketing company that specializes in helping small firms generate more referrals and stay top of mind with their audience. He has spent nearly a decade working with legal and financial professionals to grow their firms without the frustration and hassle of appeasing the search engine gods. When he isn't marketing, he's writing. A lot. He has published 24 books over the last 10 years, most of which deal with the lesser known historical events and people from all over the world. He's also part of the autism spectrum disorder community and hopes to educate others on the neurodiversity world and the special abilities we all have. So, John, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm looking forward to this discussion as well. I think it's a very important discussion to have, and I don't think a lot of people are talking about this, especially just in the realm of business. So I'm looking forward to the conversation we're going to have. But before I get into any questions I have for you, I'd love for you just to share a little bit more about yourself and how did you become educating others on neurodiversity?
Yes. So when it comes to the neurodiversity side of things, I was one of those late diagnoses. I spent a lot of my 20s kind of doing that thing where you're trying to discover yourself and you're traveling and you're learning and, trying to observe other people. And the more that I learned about other people, the more that I started to sort of question whether or not, was I doing something wrong or was I just on a different wavelength from other people? And it was one of those things, it almost started out as not a joke, but I started going down these paths, especially just with mental health in general. And it's okay, maybe I just have some sort of generalized anxiety disorder, started going down. And then I saw the sort of everything that could be associated with the autism spectrum. And as I kept getting deeper and deeper into it, I'm just checking off all of these boxes. And it was, at first I was like, no, there's no way, because I was admittedly very ignorant in that I thought that most people who are on the spectrum weren't necessarily, this sounds cold and I don't really mean it this way, but weren't really capable of functioning independently on their own in society. The only real exposure I had to people on the autism spectrum were people who were really severely debilitated by it, who needed constant care, who could not really function on their own. And so as I educated myself a lot more, I was no, and I realized there's this whole world of people out there who identify as being on the spectrum, but they're just, on the surface, they may look quote unquote normal, but there are just things here and there. The way their minds work, the way they process things could be a little bit different. And so it's been a really illuminating experience for me personally, not just learning about the community as a whole, but also seeing how we fit into the business world, into society, and where, people like me, our strengths can really shine and sort of complete the entire picture as we all really just work together and navigate life.
Right. Well, and I think you did touch on one misconception already there too is, somebody who's going to be on the spectrum just, can't perform, they can't do things for themselves, but obviously, there's a range of, the disability, if we want to say, that's
Yeah.
what we want to call it. So what other misconceptions maybe are there about, this situation, and especially as it starts to apply to business as well? I mean, we know that kids sometimes struggle in school and things like that too, and we've had that conversation. But I
Yeah.
think we don't always understand like the misconception around the skills and the value that they can bring also to business.
Yeah. So the biggest misconception that I've seen immediately is that just because someone is on the autism spectrum does not automatically mean that they're like super good at math or super good at like any of the STEM subjects, right? Like for me personally, like I can navigate a spreadsheet. I love a good spreadsheet. I love plugging in some numbers. That's great. I hate math. I hate math so much. I had a lot of interest in various scientific fields growing up. I wanted to be astronomer, geologist, paleontologist, all of it, all of the ologists.
Nice.
But I would get to a certain level in the scientific coursework and it became too much for me. And that's not where my strength was. Instead, my strength is in writing. I can write for days. And it's, in evidence of, I've written 24 books over the last 10 years. And it's like, it doesn't feel like a ton of work to me. I can sit down and I can publish, go through the entire publishing process of a book, a 300-page book, in the matter of like 3 to 6 months, because that's what energizes me. That's like where my skill set is. And yeah, so don't just assume that people on the autism spectrum are just really good at like a very limited thing. Like we do have very limited interests, and that is very true, but it could be in just about anything.
Right. Well, and I've also heard too that, sometimes you could be super hyper focused on something as well. And then sometimes, there may be some distractions. And so, figuring out too what that skill is that they're really good at too. And like when they're able to focus versus maybe some things that cause distractions and what we can do to maybe minimize that, I think is important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing that I think can benefit a lot of businesses, large or small, especially when you're learning about skill sets, even if it's for the neurodiverse community, it also benefits you learning about all of your employees. One of the things that I think we do really well at Spotlight Branding is part of our hiring process. We have people take the Enneagram and we have people take the Clifton Strengths. And for those people
I love that, Strengths Finders.
Yes, absolutely. And so for people who aren't familiar, Enneagram is like more of a personality test, really shows like how you communicate, maybe respond to things, stuff like that. But then the Clifton Strengths, or the Strength Finders as it used to be known, is a list of 34 different strengths ranked in order of like what your strongest is to what your least strongest is. They make it very clear that you don't have weaknesses. It's just your least strong strength, I guess is a weird way to word that. But those sorts of things though really help you not just understand where maybe someone who is neurodiverse is more well suited, but it helps you understand the rest of your team as well, and helps you really see, okay, who's really a good strategic thinker? Those people might be suited for, one position or another. Who are your more influential people? Who are your more relational people? Those might be better in a client facing role because that's what energizes them. That's where their strengths are. And so, yeah, I really love those as tools for not like I said, not just neurodiverse people, but just for everyone. It helps you kind of bridge that gap and doesn't keep people kind of separated or siloed into different classifications. It really kind of blurs those lines and brings everybody together.
Right. It's so important. I think too, so as somebody who would be hiring staff, maybe what are some of the tips that can help us identify, who would be a great fit, for our company, and how can we tap into the strengths that they do have to make them have a more successful opportunity?
Yeah, the assessments I think are the good starting point, but also I think you as a business owner do need to understand what strengths play really well in certain roles. And certainly, as far as we could tell, I've been with Spotlight Branding for 8 years. The company has been in existence for going on 11 or 12 years at this point. And there is a little bit of trial and error, not saying that people in the past were purposely hired in poor roles. It's one of those things that you learn as a business owner along the way. And over time, you can kind of see, all right, well, this person really excelled at this particular element of their role, and that these strengths really correlate to that. And then at that point, it's just finding, okay, well, what's more important? Do I really want someone who can sit down and execute and knock out a lot of tasks? Or does this role really need someone who is good at building rapport with clients and who can, really focus more on retention or even cross-selling or upgrading in that case? And so it's just it's finding those balances and really honing in on finding the person who has those exceptional strengths.
Right. And I think too, as employers, sometimes we might have an idea in our head of how something needs to be done to get to a certain outcome, but there might be another way to get to that same outcome, right? So I think having some flexibility in how someone maybe can perform what they're doing, as long as you get what you need done at the end, right? And so I think sometimes we may be a little bit afraid of that change, or something's being different. It's not the same as it's always been,
Yeah.
So like, how would you encourage employers then to maybe be a little bit more open to how things are being done?
For me, it's reframing your expectations. At the end of the day, look at what you're doing right now, and then look at the potential outcomes of making a tweak here and there. If at the end of the day, it's still going to be a net positive, why not at least experiment for 6 months, for 9 months? It can be undone. You can undo a lot of those procedural changes, But for example, if your hiring practice is simply just looking at hundreds of resumes and picking out, 5 or 6 that seem to be the most qualified, one, that's a ton of time you're spending, but also it's really more of a crapshoot at the end of the day because you're really guessing and hoping that you found the right people. Make some tweaks to your hiring process. Send out a quiz. Weed out some people in terms of, specific skills for that role. Send out the assessments, find those things where the role really fits. I think that's one thing that we do really well. If we have an open position for a job, we'll get 500, 600, 700 applicants because we're just in a large city. And rather than having our hiring manager sift through all of those resumes, we'll just send out a quiz to people who first apply the right way. Right? Like maybe the job posting says, don't apply directly through Indeed, send an email to this address. And that weeds out 90% of people right off the bat because a lot of people are just blindly applying to all these jobs. So you have some of these steps built in. You're saving your hiring manager some time and stress trying to find, and you eventually get down to a really a great candidate that you can feel really great about starting.
Well, I love that idea of sending out a quiz, to a potential candidate too. And like I said, I love too having where something weeds someone out too. I used to do the same thing that would say, kind of in the bottom of an ad, do this. And a lot of people don't even read it. Right. So you're like, yeah, you can't pay attention to details. Probably not the best fit if you can't follow instructions. Right. But so if we were to put together some type of quiz, and I know this is probably different because of the industry or size of business or things like that too, but maybe what are some of the ideas that you could give to us to know what to put into a quiz to even send that out and maybe start using that to cut down the number of applicants to a more reasonable number?
Right. One thing you can do, especially if you are just genuinely curious about the types of people who are applying, you can ask someone to create a short video, 1 to 3 minutes, answering a specific prompt. And then that way you can kind of humanize the applicant a little bit, see their face, see their mannerisms, kind of see how they present themselves. You can also do some specific, like detail-oriented tasks, like, create a Facebook page for this business, blah, 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 and have specific things. See if they're able to just follow basic instructions and do that. Another thing is just, ask them some questions relating to gauging their knowledge in your specific industry, right? So we do marketing. We might ask a question like, how would you set up a marketing campaign to generate leads on Facebook? Or, what kind of offer would you do to, increase sales by 20% for new customers, whatever it is, that you're doing. So it doesn't have to be a really long quiz, 3 to 5 questions that, we talk about, having people apply the right way up front, that weeding out 90% up front. That quiz will weed out even more people, because there are just some people who won't want to do it. They won't want to put in the work. Admittedly, you will have some people push back on that. You might have some people come back and be like, my time is more valuable than this quiz, or, you could do this with an interview. Or like, we even had one person, their mom called me, because I used to run the hiring process, and we had a candidate, his mom called me to make sure that we weren't like going to scam him, or that like, just to like make sure we were a legitimate company. So you might have some anomalies here and there, but for the most part, what we've seen is that this works really well in weeding out a lot of people that you wouldn't normally waste your time on anyway.
That's a great idea. So when you are hiring someone, then let's say we find a candidate and we're like, we understand, what they're going to bring to the table, and there, maybe some accommodations that potentially need to be made too. So what are some of those things that maybe as employers we need to think about in terms of how to accommodate any challenge that they may be facing because of the, being on the spectrum? Like, what do we need to do as employers in that as well?
Yeah, I think communication is key. Have that open door, over communicate if you need to, and just make sure that you understand, what's reasonable. And I think what's reasonable could be subjective, just depending on what you need. But like, me, for example, I perform best when you just leave me alone and let me do my job. But at the same time, I do also understand, especially because I am on the leadership team, there are a lot of meetings and there are a lot of small group conversations. That's not where my skill set is. I struggle to process those sorts of things quickly. I struggle to give opinions or feedback or insight in that moment. And so if you can just, set up an understanding, and it's like, hey, give me a couple of hours, or give me an overnight to think about this. I will get my responses back to you. And I think that's reasonable in most cases. There might be certain emergency situations where you need a decision right now, and you just got to do what you have to do. But just being able to be a little bit flexible, not necessarily having to be so cut and dry, so black and white. The way that things have always been done don't necessarily need to be the way that they continue to be, right? And so having that flexibility and just being able to keep those open lines of communication and set reasonable expectations, I don't think is too much to ask for most businesses to do.
Right. Well, and I think too, things have changed over the last 3 years, even in terms of most of the time in the past, we were all in an office together and had to interact with each other, maybe sit next to each other, right? And now so many people are at home, working remotely, and so maybe what are some of the challenges or the things that we need to think about for maybe both of those settings? Like if people are together, how do we make sure that the employee feels part of that group and included? And how, if it's remote, do we also have everyone maybe feel like they're part of a team, yet also has that individual time where they can be doing their work without having a supervisor right there?
Yeah. There's a lot of trust involved in that. First of all, like you have to be able to trust that your team is still getting the work done. And at the end of the day, their KPIs, their numbers will tell you one way or another if that's being done or not. But, you still want to build that sort of in-office feel, even if everybody's miles apart, separated at their homes. An easy, small way to do this is just to have like a daily or a weekly huddle. Get all up together in a Google Meet, have a couple of prompts. We get together every week We have some people in office. We also have a team in Mexico. We're all together. They're up on a giant video board in a Google Meet. The rest of us are in a conference room together. And it's 2 prompts. That's literally all it is. We'll go around the room and share like a core value shout out. Everyone will get to communicate like, hey, this person helped me with this, or this person did this and really exemplified this core value. And so other team members who may not have been privy to that are now kind of in on it, and we're all on the same page there. And then the other prompt is just like a random fun question, would you rather do this, or what's your favorite that, stuff like that, to where we can all get to know each other a little bit more as well.
Right. I think that's important. I do the same thing because now my whole team is spread out and we're all remote too, where it's so different. And so is there, maybe a tip that you can help as an employer too, if we are hiring someone, how can we help train even in the new position and make sure that they are aware exactly what they need to be doing if we can't be side by side and working right with them, if they're working from home or something like that too? Like, how can we set them up for success and get them trained in a position if we're not there all the time?
Yeah. One, make sure that everything is documented. Every system, every process is well documented. Even in your onboarding, you're going to be going through your processes and procedures, but it's drinking from a fire hose those first couple of weeks for new employees. Right. And so, you got to have that understanding that they're not going to retain everything, but make sure that you have those processes in place. They're easily accessible for people to refer back to. The irony is, especially with me personally, and everyone, is wired very differently in the neurodiverse community and really just in general. But I ask a ton of questions, and like something might be laid out for me, but then I will ask, well, what happens in this situation, or what happens in that situation? Or, you're not going to account for all of that in your manuals. So make yourself accessible, make yourself available to answer a lot of those questions. But I say it was a little bit ironic because I find myself, if I'm in training, one of my weaknesses is I may not communicate enough. I may explain something in a way that makes sense to me, and then I might leave it up to people to, ask questions on their own. Don't necessarily rely on people to do that. Like one of the things that I've really had to focus on personally is making sure that I give people the opportunity to ask questions. I make sure that I, even if I need to double back and re-explain something, just doing everything that I need to do in order to make sure that people feel good about whatever I'm training them on, that they feel equipped to do that. And there's only so much hand holding that you can do. Like at the end of the day, It's up to people to affirm, yes, I'm good. Yes, I've got this. And then they need to go out and demonstrate that. But just to me, the communication aspect of it is really one of, if not the most important thing. And just doing everything you can to get them all the information they need, give them as many opportunities as you can to ask them questions, and just make sure that everybody walks away on the same page.
Right. Well, I mean, I think with the explanation that you've given, that pretty much applies to anyone, right? Whether they're on the spectrum or not, because everyone's going to have their strengths. Everyone's going to have some things that are more challenging. Everyone's going to need to have great training, right? The opportunity to ask questions, right? So I think really what I'm understanding from this whole conversation too is really there's not that much of a difference. There may be, kind of a few different challenges maybe that, that we're facing, but overall, right, we all have things that we can do easily, some things that maybe aren't as easy. Sometimes we may get distracted. Sometimes we might be hyper focused on things. So I think it's really just understanding each person and what they can do effectively, and really harnessing their skills to the best of our ability as managers too, to help them be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I've seen a lot, is whether it's me versus someone else, if we're trying to get from point A to point B, we'll both get to point B. We may take extremely different routes to get there, but we're going to get there. And at the end of the day, you're looking for a result, you got KPIs to hit. And if you need to have someone who does things a very different way, who processes things a different way that you can't really wrap your head around, because I deal with this often. People don't like, great result. They're not entirely sure how I got there, but because it's not how they would have done it. But at the end of the day, the result is really the most important thing. And so just having that environment where people can feel comfortable and shine and be the best that they can be is going to give you the best chance for success.
So is there anything else that you feel would be helpful for those listening to this that maybe I didn't know to ask the question that you want to share?
Not necessarily in terms of the neurodiversity aspect of it. I think as the science continues to advance and we just as a society have a deeper understanding of it, these conversations, I think, will be a lot more common. There won't be as much even perceived friction. It won't feel like there's just all this extra stuff that we have to account for. It's just going to be a daily part of life. It's no longer going to be, well, we have to do this, we have to be accessible for these couple of people, but then we have our standard stuff. It's not going to be like that. It's just going to be, this is what this employee needs. This employee needs this employee needs this. And it's all how everyone can come together to perform at their most optimal level.
Exactly. So I know we're coming close to the end of the time that we have together. So I would love for you to share if you have an offer that you would like to extend to our listeners, and also how can they connect with you?
Absolutely. So if you're interested in learning more about Spotlight Branding and the work that we do provide marketing services for solo and small firms. But broadly, if you're not in the legal or financial industries that we serve, you can still check out spotlightinsider.com. We have a ton of great content going up every single day, different articles, podcast episodes, videos designed not just around marketing, but tech, strategy. A lot of this hiring stuff that we've been talking about goes on there. We also have personal development section with a lot of time management or mental health conversations going on. Our industry, specifically the legal industry, is pretty underserved in that regard. So I take a lot of pride in having a lot of those topics and articles show up there. So check out spotlightinsider.com. You can join our free insider community there to have all that content delivered right to you every week. But if you would like to talk with me more just about my experience or some other things that we're doing in Spotlight Branding, you can just reach out to me directly at John, JOHN, at spotlightbranding.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you, John, for being a guest on my show and talking about this topic. I really appreciate your doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a lot of fun. Glad to do it.
Thanks. And to the listener, thank you as well for tuning in. I hope you found this discussion interesting and you enjoyed the topic of neurodiversity in the workplace. If you have any additional questions or comments, be sure to reach out to John at the links that he shared or send me a message at media@abandp.com. I hope you can join me for my next interview. And remember, you can connect with me on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And my website is abandp.com. You can find the podcast Biz Help for You posted on several favorite podcast platforms, including iTunes, Google, TuneIn, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And would you please share my show with those you know and leave a review on your favorite platform? I'd really appreciate your support. Until next time, have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Biz Help for You. Please join your host, Candy Messer, again next time. Have a terrific day.